Andy Austin here in somebody else's spare bedroom. I'm still away from home at the moment. A quick video for you on motivation. This is a question that came up from a friend actually the other day. Asked me to explain my issue on motivation and especially motivational training and stuff like that. I've always held that self-motivation is one of the hardest things for people to do. Motivation is an externally mediated event. We tend to be motivated by the environment, and we tend to normalize our behaviors according to things within the environment. Quite often when we're at home and we're in our own environment without external influence, our motivation levels can easily begin to drop away and deteriorate. Because we don't have any external influences coming in, our environment is merely reflecting what we have on the inside. So essentially, motivation is something that comes from external sources. That's why even the top sports people, the top athletes, the top business executives and so forth, they may well be motivated people, but look at the environment in which they're in, where motivation is largely mediated by external events, whether it be responsibility for other people's income if you run a company, whether it means you've got to pay the bill, pay the tax bill, do your VAT, whether it means you've got to fulfill the needs of the team and the coach who shouts a lot and demands higher standards constantly, or the team captain, and people don't want to let down their teammates, people don't want to let down their workmates, and so on. Anyone who's been in a workplace where motivation begins to wane, essentially the atmosphere within a group can begin to degrade and no one's motivated to do anything. Well, why should I bother? Because no one else does anything around here. It's the classic thing, something I've just seen this morning walking the dogs. I tend to pick up a piece or two of litter every time I go to the park. And I recognize just how many people will walk across a piece of litter that's right beside a bin and not pick it up. Well, why should I bother? Because no one else does. And so people are measuring their motivational purpose against the apparent lack of motivation that's present in other people. Whereas I would just pick it up irrespective of whether anyone else is doing it or not. Because I've learned to disconnect from my own motivation stuff being matched by the environment. I do stuff for the right reason. Which then brings me to decisions. An awful lot of people are locked into a position where they allow other forces extraneous to themselves, other people, systems, organizations, things within culture and society, to make their decisions for them. Easiest example of this is look at the clothes you wear and the reason why you drive that particular brand of car. These are decisions made by marketing executives putting large sums of research, large sums of money into the research to persuade people who think that when they buy something, put it on and think, oh, that looks nice, they've arrived at that decision themselves. And yet, anyone who looks at photographs of themselves from the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, think, oh my goodness, what was I thinking? I can't believe I wore that. But at the time, you thought that was really looking good. Why does fashion work? Simply because people measure their choices against what everyone else is doing. So what I put is this. Motivation is sourced externally, so look and pay careful attention to what those influences upon you are with your motivation. Decisions need to be an internal process. When people are doing stuff, the most successful people tend to be the most decisive. They know how to make decisions, they know how to stick with decisions, they know when to undecide something at the right moment, because knowing when to quit is a very important skill too. In personal development and motivation, there's this thing about you must just keep persisting. They tell you about Colonel Sanders' magic light bulb, where he took 1,000 light bulbs and had to make them 1,000 different ways and take them to different places. But you know the stories. The endless mixing and matching of motivational stories where the person simply persisted. Thomas Edison and his light bulb, Colonel Sanders and his chicken recipe, and all the other things that are just the standard tropes of motivational speakers. Persistence doesn't really always pay off. Often it's the source of bankruptcy and much misery, and a lot of people go through their life being an absolute abject failure because they can't admit they made the wrong decision. So knowing when to back down on a decision is part of a decision process. So Make decisions for oneself and learn how to make better decisions. Look very carefully for your external sources of motivation. And if things aren't working out in that way, the NLPers will know how to do a elicitation of the strategy, the visual auditory kinesthetic strategy component. Most of them are focusing that on motivation. Forget it. Forget motivation strategies. I don't see that as being useful. Pay more attention to how you make decisions. Learn to make better decisions. There's lots of business books written about this, and I recommend get half a dozen of these different books. Learn how to make better decisions. And to say it again, pay very careful attention to your external sources of motivation. And if they're not very good, do something about that. Make a decision to get that sorted.